President, please be seated. The court is back in session. Before I hand over the floor to lead co-lawyer for civil party to put question to this civil party, the chamber would like to issue an oral ruling on new witness for treatment of the Vietnamese. In order to provide timely notice to the parties, the trial chamber now issues a partial decision on E319/36, the international co-prosecutor request to call for additional witnesses and to admit several written records of interview listed in Annex J to the motion E319/36.2. The parties responded to this motion orally during proceedings on the 1st December 2015. This oral decision is limited to the international co-prosecutor's request to call the proposed witness on the treatment of the Vietnamese, whom the OCIJ interviewed in case 003, and the international co-prosecutor's request to admit 3 of the proposed witness newly disclosed written records of interview from case 003, E319/23.3.44, E319/23.3.46, and document E319/23.3.47, discussed in paragraphs 11 and 12 of the international co-prosecutor's motion. The civil party lead co-lawyers support the international co-prosecutor's requests. The Nguyen Chia defense submits that should the chamber grant the international co-prosecutor's requests, the proposed witness be called to testify only after the case 003 investigation is complete, and that all of the proposed witness recently disclosed written records of interviews be admitted, including document E319/23.3.45 and document E319/23.3.48. No party objected to the admission of these additional 2 written records of interview. The Khieu Samphan defense objects to the calling the proposed witness, arguing that because the co-prosecutors were aware of this witness during the case 002 investigation, the international co-prosecutor's request is tardy. The Khieu Samphan defense also submits that none of the written records of interview proposed by the international co-prosecutor should be tendered into evidence before the case 003 investigation has been completed. The trial chamber notes that although DCCAM interviewed the proposed witness in 2007, this interview contains minimal information relevant to the treatment of the Vietnamese. See document E3/9092. The written records of interview recently disclosed by the ICIJ contain such information in detail. The chamber is certified that this evidence on the treatment of the Vietnamese was not available before the opening of the trial. Consequently, all requests fulfill the requirements of Internal Rule 87.3 and .4. The Chamber therefore grants the International Co-Prosecutor's request to call the proposed witness and assigns him the pseudonym 2 TCW 1000. The trial chamber also admits into evidence 2 TCW 1000's written records of interview as requested by both the International Co-Prosecutor and the defense, namely document E319/23.3.44, E319/23.3.45, E319/23.3.46, E319/23.3.47, and E319/23.3.48. Now, the Chamber gives the floor to lead co-lawyers for civil party. And you can proceed with your questioning. Please wait, lawyer. You have the floor first, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a request for clarification directed to the civil party lawyer. And I'm referring to document E3/5631 on the first page. That's the interview of the civil party with the present lawyer who is interviewing the civil party. And in the English, and it's also in relation to earlier questions from the civil party lawyer in relation to the Vietnamese calendar versus the Western calendar. On English page 00678-292 and Khmer 0089753 and French 0089837, I read in English, at 9 o'clock on 17 April 1975, 17 March according to the Western calendar, and then the story about the killing of his family. So it seems to suggest here that the Western calendar is 1 month earlier. On the other page it seems to suggest that it's something else, but the question is relevant because if it's on 17th of March 75, technically we are outside the jurisdiction of this tribunal. And also in relation to the questions that the civil party lawyer asked, I think it would be beneficial to all parties to know if that is a mistake in the English language in E3/5631.
Your Honours, when this civil party was questioned earlier about the differences between the Vietnamese calendar and the Western calendar, which is the same as the Khmer calendar, what he did say, which ultimately clarifies the point raised by my learned friend, is that today's date, being the 7th of December, means that in the Vietnamese calendar it's the 26th of October. This means that the Vietnamese calendar is always earlier than the Western calendar. And it's my submission that that response ultimately clarifies the inconsistencies that do appear on the supplementary statement at two parts of the statement, or rather the confusion that arises from the explanation given on the first part, the first page of the supplementary statement, and then the second page, which refers to a different date. It's my submission, Your Honours, that that question has already been clarified in this civil party's earlier answers.
I'm sure it's me, but I'm not sure if I understand. My concern is is he describing events before the jurisdiction of this court, being 17 April 75, or is he describing events on 17 April 75? So I think the court should know whether the alleged killing of his family took place before the time period that the court has jurisdiction. That is the only question, I think, which is relevant.
President, before I give the floor to legal lawyer for civil parties, I would like to ask the particular representative of civil parties. I heard the example referring to December of that year. So I think it is confusing concerning the calendar. And if that is the case, I think the Vietnamese calendar perhaps 2 months after the Western calendar, not 1 month after.
Your Honours, it's my understanding that the Vietnamese calendar revolves around the lunar calendar. So it depends on the moon and the phases of the moon and when the moon is full, or the different phases of the lunar processes. When Mr. Chung Young Chet says that today is the 26th of October according to the Vietnamese calendar, it does make it just over 1 month before the date of the Western calendar.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask an additional question to the civil party. Sir, if you answer questions that involve a date or time today, questions that refer to the period 75 to 79, are you answering using the Vietnamese calendar or the Western calendar? Do you understand my question?
Answer. Actually, if we are talking of a Vietnamese calendar, I think it was after the 7 day. It was 7 days after the Khmer New Year that I was transferred to another area. So if I refers to the Vietnamese calendar, it was the 4th month of the calendar. 1 month after the Khmer New Year that my parents had been killed.
But more generally, you will be asked dates again, I guess. Will you, if somebody asks you about the period between 75 and 79 and asks you a date, will you answer according to the Vietnamese calendar or to the Western calendar? So we know how to put your answer in perspective or to understand your answer.
Answer. I am referring to the Vietnamese calendar when I'm talking about that.
Sorry, are we clear now about the relationship between Vietnamese and Khmer calendar? I've heard 1 month, 2 months.
But sorry to interrupt, Judge Hans, but the question is, this is a statement from this civil party which was written down by the civil party lawyer. And here it says that 17 April 75 is 17 March 75 here. So then this must be a mistake in that document, and if Mrs. Nguyen would be so kind to admit that there's a mistake in that typewritten version of that document, then we're all fine.
Your Honours, to be perfectly clear, in that document, E3/5631, there are two different references to different dates. And then following those references, there is an associated reference to a Vietnamese calendar date. I have to make very clear, Your Honours, that I'm not the witness in this case. I'm not giving the evidence. The evidence is to come from the civil party. Now, in the first reference, that is on ERN in English, 006789292, and this is French 0089837, Khmer 00897513. It does say, at 9 o'clock on 17th of April 1975, in brackets, 17 March according to the Western calendar, which would suggest that the Western calendar is earlier than the Vietnamese calendar. However, on the next page, which is English 006789293, Khmer 00897515, French 00...
President, lawyer, please slow down. Do not speak very fast, otherwise there is an issue with interpretation. We want to have a full interpretation for all parties. You are here not to speaking through yourself, and please leave time for interpreters to interpret in full message.
On the second page of the English document, and I was just reading the French ERN numbers, 00898373, it says, in June 1978, and then in brackets it says, that is July 1975, according to the Western calendar. So, Your Honour, there is on the face of the record an inconsistency in the way that the Vietnamese dates are reflected in relation to the Western dates. There is no contention about the fact that the first page puts it that the Western calendar dates are earlier than the Vietnamese dates, and that the second page puts it that the Western calendar dates are later than the Vietnamese calendar dates. That does create some confusion. But, Your Honour, it's my submission that this civil party has already answered the question, and particularly so when it was put to him, what is today's date and what date is it in the Vietnamese calendar? And his answer suggested that the Vietnamese dates are earlier than the Western dates.
បើមានបញ្ហាអញ្ជើញតទៀត
President, I don't think there is an issue here, so we need to listen carefully and then we can understand it. So you may now proceed, a lawyer for a civil party.
Thank you, Your Honours. Now, Mr. Chung Young Chet, just before the lunch break, you were telling the court about the horrific mass killings of your entire family, of which you were the sole survivor. You said that you managed to get out of the mass grave and that you found yourself at the house of Mr. Ta Lee, who assisted you. How long were you at Mr. Ta Lee's house? How long did you spend there?
Answer. I stayed at Ali's house for 1 month. Before there was someone to tell that Vietnamese had to leave by river to Vietnam. At that time, Li told me to stay, to remain in my house. I was there for 2 weeks, and later on, 1 month later, Li left for Vietnam.
When Mr. Ta Lee left for Vietnam, did you come with him?
Answer. He told me after I had came out of the forest. 8 members within his family could board the boat and leave for Vietnam. And I was able to be on board at that time.
Was this pursuant to some policy by the Khmer Rouge or the CPK or the Democratic Kampuchea to send people back to Vietnam or to get Vietnamese people out of Cambodia?
Answer. I do not know about that matter. Talias were able to send us to Vietnam when there was an exchange of rights with Vietnam. At that time, I was able to hide in the boat.
Was this Mr. Ta Lee's boat?
Answer. It was Tali's boat. And when I walked and reached the intersection of the river or Tunle Buon Mok, I was able to board a motorboat.
Just getting back to the details about Mr. Ta Lee's boat, you said that he had about 8 people in his family and that you went with him in his boat to another place. You said that you had to hide underneath the boat. What was the reason that you had to hide?
Answer. Tali's group of people were allowed to go back to Vietnam. There were only 8 members within Tali family or group, but I was able to hide in the boat and was able to go with his group. And when we reached Tunle Buon Mok, I was able to get out from hiding and help paddle the boat.
Could you describe the pathway that the boat took from where Mr. Lee resided to Tonle Bun Muk?
Hansa. We were traveling on a boat, and after we reached the tributary of Tonle Bun Muk, we were able to board the motorboat, and we left for Nha Luang. At that time, I helped to row the boat, and when we reached the tributary, we boarded a motorboat with about 60 more people, and I do not know about the exchange of rights with the Vietnam.
Just to clarify, is Tonle Bun Muk the same as the place which is called the Lake of Four Faces? This being the place in front of the Royal Palace in Phnom Penh. Is that the place that you're talking about?
Yes, I talk about the tributary in front of the Royal Palace.
How many days did it take you on the journey on Mr. Tali's boat to get to this tributary at the Tonle Bun Muk?
We traveled day and night. Days we rowed the boat 3 nights, and we spent 3 nights before we arrived at the tributary.
Now, what happened when you arrived at Tonle Bun Muk? Were you separated from Mr. Tali at that point?
When we reached the tributary, there was a ferry so that we could go to Nha Luang. So he told me that it's better for me to get on the ferry, otherwise his family will be in danger. So he placed me in the ferry with other people.
Now, you said earlier that there was about 60 people on this ferry. Who were the people on the ferry? Were they Vietnamese, or were there also Khmer people?
They were all Vietnamese on the ferry. There was no Khmer. Even Khmer got on the ferry, they would not be allowed to cross.
Who did the ferry belong to?
Of course, we were in the Khmer Rouge regime, but I did not know whether the ferry belongs to the Vietnam or the Vietnamese or to the Khmer Rouge. However, it was the Khmer Rouge who instructed us to get on the ferry for the barter program with the Vietnam.
How did the Khmer Rouge identify who they would let onto the ferry? If it might save some time, I'll rephrase that question to how did the cadre of the CPK or the Democratic Kampuchea identify who they would allow to go on the ferry?
Well, if we do it historically correct, Mr. President, DK didn't exist. That didn't happen until early 76. CPK didn't announce itself until September 77. The Khmer Rouge was a title that was never used by the CPK. We're actually still in the period of the National Front, so if Council wants to be historically accurate, what did the members of the National Front say to the witness?
Your Honour, the evidence from this civil party was that the Khmer Rouge instructed people to get onto the ferry to engage in this barter process. So he said that it was the Khmer Rouge who instructed them to get onto the ferry. It's my submission that we should go with the identification of who had that role that was given by the civil party.
President, civil party lawyer, you can use that word. In fact, the word Khmer Rouge has been commonly used in these proceedings, and it is familiar with the public opinion as well. It is up to the bench to deliberate on the issues or the definition or the circumstances of the Khmer Rouge. For example, in this tribunal, it is commonly known as the Khmer Rouge Tribunal rather than the ECCC. For that reason, civil party lawyer, you may proceed with the term Khmer Rouge.
Thank you, Your Honours. Mr Chung Yung Chet, I was just asking you, how did the Khmer Rouge identify the people who they would allow to go onto the big ferry?
People got on the ferry because there were no boats available. Boats have been burned, and some only people who could come could get on the ferry. Others who actually still had boats could row the boat, and of course they were part of this battle process program for assault.
You gave evidence just before that only Vietnamese people were on the boat and that Khmer people were not allowed to go on the boat. You said that the Khmer Rouge instructed who was to go on the boat. So the question is, how did the Khmer Rouge identify who was Vietnamese to allow them to go on the boat and who was Khmer to not allow them to go on the boat?
President, civil party, please hold on, and Councillor Kong Som On, you have the floor. Kong Som On, thank you, Mr. President. I believe this is a repetitive question, as the civil party already testified how people could get onto the ferry, as those who had the boat could row their boat to get on the ferry or to row the boat to Net Lương for the barter process. So there is no distinct procedure beyond that, and it has already been testified by the civil party.
Your Honours, I'm afraid that counsel for Khieu Samphan has misconstrued the question and misconstrued the evidence that has been given so far. Mr Chung Yung Chet said to the court that only Vietnamese people were allowed to go on the ferry, and the question is, how did the Khmer Rouge identify who was Vietnamese to allow to go onto the ferry? That question has not yet been answered.
President, the objection by Councillor Kong Som On is overruled, as this is not a repetitive question, and the Chamber needs to hear the response from the civil party to the good question put to him by the lawyer for civil party. And Mr. Civil Party, please respond to the last question put to you by the civil party lawyer. civil party. They selected people to get on the ferry. They asked who were Vietnamese, who were Chinese, or who were Khmer. So, because Vietnamese people spoke Khmer with accent, then they could identify it. As for the Khmer people, they could identify them immediately through their facial figures and features.
What happened to the Khmer people who wanted to go onto the boat? What happened to them?
Of course, they faced the same difficulty as I did. So, for that reason, they wanted to go away, but when they arrived at the ferry, they were not allowed to go. Even some Vietnamese would not be allowed to get on the ferry. They could use their own boats to go, so everybody had to find his or her own means of going.
Now, at the time, you were a 13 or 14-year-old child travelling alone. Did you know anybody on the boat?
No, I did not know anyone. I just mingled with the rest.
Were there any Khmer Rouge cadre on this boat?
I cannot recall who were supervisors or who were not, because they were all wearing black uniforms with a scarf around their neck. However, they did not carry any weapon.
Now, you said earlier that this large boat, the Khmer Rouge boat, went to Niek Lung in Prey Veng. Is that right?
Yes.
How long did it take to travel to Niek Lung in Prey Veng?
It was one night and one day before we arrived at the Net Lung. We left in early morning.
When you arrived at Niek Lung, what happened to the Vietnamese people on the boat?
So that they could negotiate with the Vietnamese side. When we got off the ferry, they counted heads, and then in exchange, the Vietnamese returned rice and salt. And after that, we were allowed to board the Vietnamese ferry.
So you're saying there was a Vietnamese ferry when you arrived at Niek Lung. Can you describe what was on the ferry and who was on that ferry when you first arrived?
I saw only rice and salt and nothing else.
Were there Vietnamese authorities on that boat, the Vietnamese boat?
No, there wasn't.
You mentioned that on arrival, there was a head count of the people on the Khmer Rouge boat. Who administered the head count?
The Vietnamese, together with the Cambodian authorities, counted head, And after they battered the salt and rice, then we got on the Vietnamese ferry.
Did you see the actual transaction take place? That is, the trading of salt and rice for Vietnamese persons.
Yes, I was there, so I witnessed it. I witnessed them transporting rice and salt from the Vietnamese ferry through the Cambodian ferry.
In fact, you were one of those who were traded for salt and rice.
Civil party, please hold on, and Councillor Copper, you have the floor.
I object to the word traded. What the witness describes is Vietnamese people on the boat and rice and other materials going back. That doesn't mean that ones are traded for the others. It happens all the time that a van with mail goes to direction A, loads off and takes something else with them. Doesn't mean that there's trading. That's the conclusion of council. So I think the word trade or trading is also, in the light of the bigger political context, not an accurate description.
Your Honours, in this civil party's evidence, he has used the term bartering process many times. He has said it at least 3 times, that when he was on the boat, it was for the bartering processes that then took place. The evidence, Your Honour, and I'm not meaning to go into any submissions because at the moment we're just listening to the evidence of this civil party. But the evidence is that Vietnamese people were put on a boat and that their lives were spared so that there could be a bartering process take place where they were essentially swapped. You could call it trading, you could call it swapping, you could call it bartering, but they were essentially bartered and swapped for bags of rice and salt. That's the evidence that has come out today.
May I respond, Mr. President? During one of the document presentation hearings, I think it was in relation to Krang Thach Chan, we showed footage of the highest possible ranking delegation of Vietnam coming to Phnom Penh, meeting Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, and other high-ranking members of the CPK. It was in fact party leader, Chairman Lu Duan, who came to Phnom Penh. You saw the footage, you might remember them being shown around in the Silver Pagoda. The relations between Vietnam and the temporary government which was in place at the time was very cordial at that. So to suggest that these Vietnamese people's lives were saved because rice was needed is a very far-fetched conclusion by this particular council and has no basis whatsoever in the political context in August 75. I think we should limit ourselves to what this witness actually saw. He might have perceived it as a barter or as a trade, but of course it wasn't.
Your Honour, my learned friend...
President Council Kong Som On, you have the floor. Kong Som On, thank you, Mr. President. Based on the facts and the testimonies of the civil party, it seems that this event took place immediately after the victory of 17 April 1975. And at that time, there was no proper administration in the country. What the civil party saw was the transferring from one ferry to the other. And it could mean one ferry belongs to the Cambodian authority while the other ferry belonged to the Vietnamese. And he also saw the transportation of rice and salt from the Vietnamese ferry to the Cambodian ferry. This cannot be defined as a bartering or an exchange program. We have heard other witnesses who testified in this court about the barter process, either individually or at the base, for example, the bartering of medicines at the Vietnamese border. Thank you. President, thank you. I believe you should end your debate on this issue at this point. And counsel for civil party, please ask your client for his grounds that lead him to conclude that it was a bartering process, firstly. And secondly, if the defense counsel wishes to clarify this matter, of course, your turn will come, and that you can use that opportunity to clarify all the concerns that you have. To clarify on the issues that might not be clear when the other party are asked. And that is the standing proceeding in this court.
Yes, Your Honour. This is not the time for closing submissions or closing statements. I will move on with getting the civil party to clarify why he characterised it as a barter. Mr. Chung Young Chet, in your evidence before, you said that there was a bartering process between the Khmer Rouge and the Vietnamese authorities. What made you conclude, or what made you consider that this was a bartering process, that is, a trading process or a transaction?
I heard other Vietnamese people say that my life was spared because of the exchange for rice and salt, so that I could go to Vietnam.
Now, when you were on the boat yourself, did you see how many bags of rice and how many bags of salt traded hands?
I saw rice and salt, but I cannot tell you how many bags there were, because by that time I was instructed to got off the ferry first.
What happened when you got off the ferry? What happened after that?
I got off the ferry, then they did the head counts. And after they did the head counts, then they exchange the head counts number with the bags of rice and salt.
So you're saying that after they did a head count of the Vietnamese people off the Khmer Rouge boat, they checked it against the numbers of bags and salt on the Vietnamese boat. Is that what you're saying?
I did not know whether they counted us against bags of rice or salt, but I did see them carrying the bags and salt from the Vietnamese ferry to the Cambodian ferry. And after that, then we were allowed to board the Vietnamese ferry.
When you had boarded the Vietnamese ferry, did everybody who was on the Khmer Rouge ferry go onto that Vietnamese ferry with you?
No, there was no Khmer getting on that ferry. They were all Vietnamese.
Where did that ferry then head off to?
It headed off toward Vietnam, that is toward Châu Đốc.
And what happened to you and the other Vietnamese people when this ferry arrived in Vietnam?
When we arrived there, the Vietnamese Angkar allowed us to rest in a Vietnamese school. They distributed rice and cookeries for us. They also gave us a mat, sleeping mat, and mosquito net.
When you say Vietnamese Angkar, do you mean the Vietnamese government or the Vietnamese authorities?
It was the Angkar or the representative of Vietnam. I refer to the people who were on the ferry. And as I said, when we arrived there, they let us rest and gave us the cooking utensils.
How long did you stay in Vietnam?
I stayed in Vietnam until 1982. Then I returned to Cambodia.
Why did you decide to return to Cambodia?
Because I had no land to farm and no place where I could catch fish in Vietnam, I meant. So I decided to return to Cambodia, whether it means there was a risk for me.
Did you return to Cambodia by yourself or did you go with others?
I came along with the other people because at that time I had nothing. I had no rice, I had no money. So I got on a boat with other people and I helped them row the boat.
When you came to Cambodia, were you able to present yourself with Cambodian documentation from the previous time that you were in Cambodia?
I had documents with me when I returned in 1982, but I left it at home. I don't bring it along with me.
When you say you left it at home, do you mean you left it back in Cambodia before you left Cambodia?
When I left Cambodia, I had nothing at all because everything was burned. That is, my house was burned. I only had a pair of clothes that I was wearing at the time.
Now, Mr. Chung Young Chet, you said earlier in your evidence that as a result of the injuries that you sustained to the back of your head from being beaten with a hammer by Khmer Rouge cadre, you suffer sometimes from memory loss. What sort of things do you forget sometimes?
My memory doesn't serve me well now. Whenever I feel anxious, I cannot recall anything. When I think of the pain, it is very difficult for me to bear. I have to speak it out.
Have you ever forgotten what happened to your family? And indeed, have you ever forgotten how you survived the mass killing in 1975?
In Cambodia, I was given food to eat, I was given morning glory to eat, and then while I was in Vietnam, they gave me rice and they provide me with some necessities only for a few months. Then I had to earn a living by myself. And even when I arrived in Cambodia, I still go around earning my own living, working as a worker for somebody.
Mr. Chung Young Chet, has everything that you have told the court today in accordance with your memory about what happened to your family and how you survived that mass killing?
I witnessed the execution of my parents and my siblings. It happened right in front of my eyes. But fortunately, despite the 3 hits with an axe, I survived. However, the pain resurfaces when the weather is cold.
Is what happened to your parents something that you could ever forget?
Answer: I cannot forget what happened to me. I really want to ask the perpetrators how they are suffering if they had their family members killed.
Mr. Chung Young Chet, I believe you will have the time to do that with leave of Mr. President. Thank you for your time today, and that concludes the questions that I have for this civil party.
President, the floor is now given to the co-prosecutors to put questions to this civil party. You have the floor now.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. Good afternoon, Counsel. Good afternoon, Mr. Civil Party. My name is Andrew Boyle. I'm from the Office of the Co-Prosecutors, and I only have very few questions to follow up on my learned friend's questions. I'd first like to ask you, when did the Khmer Rouge arrive in your hometown village?
Answer. I was transferred to Da village. I can tell you the Vietnamese calendar. It was in the 5th month of Vietnamese calendar when I noticed their presence.
If I heard you correctly, you said it was in the 5th month of the Vietnamese calendar when you noticed the presence of the Khmer Rouge in your home village. And can you tell us what year that was in?
Answer. It was in 1975.
Thank you very much. My next question is, you mentioned earlier that, and correct me if I am incorrect about this, but I believe you mentioned earlier that there were approximately 30 Vietnamese families in your home village and a greater number of Khmer families. Is that correct?
Answer. Yes. At that time, it was so quiet that we decided to flee to Kandahar. There were around 30 families of us. We stayed there for 1 month when the Khmer New Year arrived. At the time, they were saying that long live the king, and if no one live in the houses, then the houses would be burned down.
Are you saying that only the Vietnamese families, the 30 Vietnamese families, went to Kandal village at that time? That the Khmer families did not leave your home village at that time?
Answer. I was living in together with 30 families of Vietnamese, and when I arrived at Da village, there were also Cham families who were living there.
I was asking about the Khmer families, in addition to the 30 Vietnamese families that lived in your home village. Were they also, did they also leave when the Vietnamese families left, or did they remain in your home village?
Answer. There were 30 families of Vietnamese. As for Khmer people, they remained living in that area.
And I heard you just mention that empty houses were burned. Are you saying that the houses of the Vietnamese who departed were burned?
Answer. The fact is that there were houses on land and there were houses on the river. Those who were living on the island, they were dispersed to live in other areas on land. And for those who were living in houses on the river, they were allowed to live on rivers. And at the times, there were sayings that long live the king. If no one lived in houses, those houses would be burned down.
Did the members of your village, your hometown village, know who in the village was ethnically Vietnamese? And if so, how did they know who was ethnically Vietnamese?
Answer. During that time, everyone, including Vietnamese, Khmer, and Cham people, were dispersed out of the villages. Those who were living on land, they had to go and find other areas on land to live in and to live on. And for those who were living in floating villages, they had to find other area to live.
I apologize if my question was not clear. I was trying to find out if you knew if the members of your village, whether it was before the arrival of the Khmer Rouge or after, whether they knew who in the village was ethnically Vietnamese and who in the village was ethnically Khmer.
Answer. For instance, we had siblings, elder sibling or parents, and the word lang tai was used, and that word lang tai meant the resident book. President, thank you. It is now break time, and the chamber will take a short break from now until 3 p.m. Court officer, please assist civil party during the break time. And please invite him back into the courtroom at 3 p.m. The court is now in recess.